Today's video lecture is about adding and subtracting rational numbers. And rational numbers are numbers that fall in between whole numbers. That is, they're a part of a whole number. So a rational number can be a fraction, it can be a decimal, it can also be a mixed number or a decimal number greater than 1. For example, 1/2 would be a rational number, as well as 2 4/5, as well as 25 hundredths, or 2 3/10, right? So there's all sorts of combinations of rational numbers, but the short definition is that it's a piece of a whole number. The standard we're going to focus on today is NS 7.1, and it's to apply and extend previous understandings of addition and subtraction to add and subtract rational numbers and represent addition and subtraction on a horizontal or vertical number line diagram. So when you look at your notebook, it should look somewhat like mine. You should have your title on the top of your right-hand page, this adding and subtracting rationals. You should also have your learning goal right underneath, exactly in the words that I provided for you. Following that, you're going to paste in your interactive learning guide, and you receive that in class. Remember, I asked you to cut along the dotted lines. So what you should have is a flat rectangle that is glued to your notebook and 4 flaps that kind of fold upward and outward as you're writing and working on them. Remember, before you start your notes, you also want to rewrite the learning goal in your own words and write down anything you already know about adding and subtracting rational numbers. Moving on to our actual lecture video notes. Like I said, today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting rational numbers, and there are 2 kind of criteria or categories of rational and irrational numbers. And those are numbers with like denominators and unlike denominators. You may want to write this into each quadrant of your foldable. What I have done is I have outlined this area. I've kind of drawn a big T through the center of my foldable. So I have these 4 distinct areas: adding like rational numbers, adding unlike, subtracting like, and subtracting unlike. Let's start with adding like rational numbers, or adding with common denominators. Now remember, the denominator is the bottom number in your fraction, and it represents the number of pieces in the whole. So the example I'm going to use here is 2/5 plus 1/5. Again, my denominators are like, because they're both 5. So the process for adding these 2 rational numbers is to, first of all, add the numerators. So step 1, add the numerators. 2 plus 1 equals 3. Step 2 says keep the same denominator. So I'm going to put that 3 over 5. And of course, your final step, step 3, is always simplify. In this specific case, 3/5 is in simplest form, so that is my final answer. If I'm adding unlike denominators, or rational numbers with unlike denominators, I need to do an extra step. So let's use an example of 2/3 plus 2/5. In this case, my first step should be to find the LCD. This is the least common denominator. And in order to do that, I'm just looking at my two denominators and I'm thinking, okay, I have a denominator of 3 and a denominator of 5. What is the smallest number that both of those denominators can go evenly into? And in this case, it is 15. In order to change my fractions so that they meet the right denominator, my number 3 needs to be multiplied by 5 to equal the new denominator, 15. If that's the case, the numerator also needs to be multiplied by 5 to reach the new numerator, which is going to be 10. When I look at the second term in my addition problem, the denominator is 5. 5 times 3 will equal my new denominator, which is 15. So I also need to multiply my numerator by 3 so that my fractions equal the same amount. 2/3 plus 2/5 is now equal to 10/15 plus 6/15. Now we're back to where we were with common denominators, so we can follow the steps as outlined to us in the previous example. Add the numerators together. 10 plus 6 is 16. Keep the same denominator, 16 over 15, and simplify my expression. 16/15 is in simplest form. However, it's an irrational number. That means that the numerator is larger than the denominator, and I can write it as a mixed number. So there's one whole in this expression, and what remains is 1/15. Either of these answers are acceptable. However, the 16/15 is something that you're going to use more frequently in algebra, in pre-algebra, so it's really important to learn to work with fractions that are irrational. So you might just want to keep it like that. As we move on to subtracting rational numbers with like denominators, let's do an example of 5/6 minus 3/6. These steps are very similar to adding with like denominators. First of all, we're going to subtract the numerators. Then we're going to keep the denominator. And lastly, we're going to simplify. 5 minus 3 is 2 over 6, which can be simplified to 1/3. The way I simplify this expression is that I know 2 and 6 have a common factor of 2. So I divided both of those numbers by 2 and got the simplified version of this expression, which is 1/3. Finally, let's do an example of subtracting with unlike denominators or different denominators. We'll use 5/8 minus 1/4. First of all, finding the LCD, or the least common denominator. The least common denominator of 8 and 4 is going to be 24. Now we just have to use a common factor to transition the numerators so that 5/8 is equal to the appropriate number of 24ths that we need to find. 8 times 3 equals 24. So we're going to multiply that 5 by 3 to get my new numerator, which is 15. And 4 times 6 equals 24. So I'm going to multiply my numerator times 6 to get my new numerator. 1 times 6 is 6. Now, again, I'm in a situation where I have common denominators, so I'm just going to solve. 15 minus 6 is 9 over 24. I can simplify this expression by dividing each term by 3, which is a common factor. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 24 divided by 3 is 8. So my final answer is 3/8. When you're finished taking all your notes for your video lecture, make sure that you're solving the proof showing me that you learned and you understood what we talked about during our video. You're also going to write down what you learned in a sentence or two, and create some kind of reflection piece. Be sure to use your left side page template, which is already in your notebook, to figure out what kind of reflection you want to do and incorporate that into your journal writing. If you have any questions, please email me or come to my office hours Tuesday from 3 to 3:30 or study hall Wednesday from 3 to 4:30.